Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is HarrisX CEO and founder, Dritan Nesho. Dritan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me again.
The RNC kicked off this week, and arguably the biggest news to come out of the convention is the fact that Donald Trump selected his running mate, and that person is Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. So first of all, HarrisX and Forbes conducted a poll about the new nominee. What do voters think about J.D. Vance?
Well, first, what you have to keep in mind about J.D. Vance is that even though he's been around for a few years as a senator and before that as a political figure after writing his very famous book, The Hillbilly Eulogy, he's still relatively unknown. And what I mean by that is that 21% of voters have not heard of him yet, and the full 23% don't have an opinion. So roughly half of the whole electorate is waiting to be introduced properly to J.D. Vance, and that's the opportunity that he will have tonight once he has his speech in front of the Republican National Convention. But I would say that of those who do know him, roughly equal numbers view him favorably to unfavorably. 27% favorably, 29% unfavorably.
When you think of the top contenders for VP, up until this week when it was announced, it was Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, amongst others. And these are lawmakers who have more of a national presence. Both of them have ran for president at some point in their career. The fact that J.D. Vance isn't as much of a household name, does that really hurt him in this?
Well, he's got room to grow and he can be built up in many different ways. What we know today is that when we ask, do you support the selection of J.D. Vance or oppose it, 40% support it, 30% oppose it, and 30% are unsure of what to make of it just yet. But amongst Republicans, 70% support it. And when you ask Republicans, are you more or less likely to vote for Trump because of the selection of J.D. Vance as vice president, 41% that they are more likely to vote for him, 4% say that they're less likely to vote for him, and about 55% say that it will not impact their vote. And therein you get everything you need to know about vice presidential selections. The old quip is that a vice president uh, doesn't help you, it can only hurt you. And I think that in this selection with J.D. Vance, Trump is tipping the hat to his base and selecting someone that plays very well and very strong with the Republican base, despite his low name ID.
So typically you're saying historically VP selection can only hurt you. Do you think that that matters here right now? Do you think that could be true?
So it's yet to be seen, right? And as you can see, the Democratic Party and the Biden campaign has already started attacking J.D. Vance from the first moment of his announcement in order to shape those perceptions. And as they say in politics, you want to shape your opponent in the minds of the voter and in the minds of the public before they have the chance to do so themselves. Right now, as it stands for the whole electorate, 21% say that they're more likely to vote for Trump because he selected Vance. 18% say that they're less likely to vote for Trump because of that. So it's by and large a wash within the margin of error. And 61%, close to two-thirds, say that it will not impact their vote, meaning that they're either voting because of Trump or Biden or some other driver, not the vice presidential nominee.
As you said earlier, J.D. Vance just got into politics a few years ago. He was elected into Senate to serve for Ohio in 2022. He's also the author of Hillbilly Elegy, which came out in 2016. Why do voters think he was selected?
That's a great question. If you ask Republicans, the number one issue or the number one reason that they believe J.D. Vance was selected by Trump is because he's a strong supporter of MAGA policies. And that is the strongest single reason that Republicans gave for J.D. Vance, followed closely by he will be loyal to Trump. So his loyalty is playing fairly strongly with the Republican base, as well as the fact that they see him as someone who's fully aligned with the set of policies that they'd like Trump to drive. When you look at independents, the picture is very similar as well, right? They 29% say that of independents say that they see him as being loyal to Trump. 27% say that he's a strong supporter of MAGA policies. The rest are all over the place, right? And so these are the two factors that are playing strongest among the base, amongst the voters in the middle, and then certainly amongst the general electorate. They are the top two reasons too.
A big question, something that has hung in the air in this election so far, is age. And JD Vance is 39 years old, so that contrasts with both Trump and Biden. Also, unlike Biden, who has been pretty much a lifelong politician, JD Vance just was elected 2 years ago. So do voters think that he has the experience?
Great question. Similar to Barack Obama, if you remember, Obama had only been in the Senate for a couple of years before he was nominated to run for president by the Democratic Party. It doesn't seem to hurt J.D. Vance. 44% see him as being qualified to run for vice president or to run on the ticket. 26% say he's not qualified. About 30% are unsure. But again, because of his lower name ID, he has the opportunity to build up those credentials, right? To get to a point where a majority of voters see him as being qualified. And again, 70% or close to 70% of Republicans view him as being qualified. In a similar fashion, we ask, how qualified do you think J.D. Vance would be if he has to step into the role of president and take over for Donald Trump? And the numbers are very similar. 42% said that he would be qualified amongst the general electorate. 27% amongst the general electorate said that he's not qualified, and the rest are somewhere in between. Roughly, 3 in 10 voters are unsure. But again, Republicans have a lot of confidence in him, and 2/3 of Republicans say that if he had to step into the role of president, he would be qualified to do that role.
This primary season has really shown the GOP as divided into two parties, more of a Nikki Haley establishment Republican and then more of a Trump MAGA Republican. You're saying that JD Vance fits nicely into that Trump MAGA Republican mold. So given his age and given his policies, do voters view him as the heir apparent to Donald Trump?
I think that that's yet to be seen, but certainly the selection of J.D. Vance plays to Trump's base. And J.D. Vance does very well with rural voters and especially with suburban voters. And obviously, his background, he comes from a downscale white demographic and a background that, as he's wrote in his book, his childhood was quite challenging. So it's a tip of the hat for that core electorate, lower educated white voters, downscale white voters in suburban areas and in rural areas that make and compose the core of Trump's voter base. And so in that regard, he's the closest thing to that voter that exists outside of Trump in the Republican Party, and it's a tip of the hat to those voters. I will also add one other thing. 80% of Republicans view J.D. Vance as an exciting pick, in part because he is young and in part because of his background. Also, 91% of Republicans and 58% of independents actually view him as being honest. And the honesty card, it's an important card, especially for voters who like anti-establishment figures and essentially view Washington as being in a gridlock and not able to produce actual solutions for them that matter to them in their day-to-day life. And that was a very interesting finding that came out in our poll. 56% of independents viewing J.D. Vance as honest and 91% of Republicans saying the same.
When we're talking about vice presidential picks, obviously I'm going to look at the counterpart here, and that is Kamala Harris, current vice president. She has had in this election cycle similar or lower approval ratings than Joe Biden. How does this dovetail, these numbers when we're talking about JD Vance, how does this dovetail with voter sentiment toward Vice President Kamala Harris?
Well, as we have shown in our polling consistently, Harris polls lower than Biden, both in terms of job approval and in terms of the horse race, especially in a head-to-head against Trump. However, she has near universal name identification, just like Biden and Trump have, by virtue of having been vice president for almost 4 years. JD Vance doesn't have that name ID, and as he shapes himself and as the Republican Party shapes him to be the vice presidential candidate and a potential heir apparent to Trump, there is a lot of opportunity to shape him in all the right way. Right now, voters are waiting to see, are waiting to hear about his biography, are waiting to hear about his positions, are waiting to hear about how J.D. Vance contributes to the ticket, and that's why they're largely split on questions like, does he care about people like me or not? Right? That in our poll, that specific question was 49% one way, 51% the other way, effectively a split. Of course, Republicans, they do think that he cares about people like them, and Trump voters say the same. Over 8 in 10 of Trump voters and over 8 in 10 of Republicans feel that way, but there's still room to grow, especially with independents. And that's where I would look for the numbers to start moving and the direction in which they move.
Clearly, this poll indicates that JD Vance has a lot of room to grow, but any numbers in here, anything else stick out to you?
Well, to your question, do voters see him as similar to Trump or not? 78% of the electorate does view J.D. Vance as being similar to Trump or having the potential to be very similar to Trump. And that's also 74% of Republicans. So again, there is a template for J.D. Vance, which is to be that heir apparent to Trump. Whether he follows that template or whether he plays more into the fact that he's also seen as being a moderate Republican, more than he's seen as being, very ensconced or historically ensconced with the MAGA movement. I think that's an interesting tension, and that will be something interesting to see. Right now, 54% of voters say that J.D. Vance holds mainstream views rather than more extreme, more far-right views, and 78% of Republicans say the same, including also 60% of independents. So there's this interesting tension in the numbers between voters seeing him as an heir apparent to Trump and the closest thing to the personification of the MAGA policies that Trump has within the Republican Party. At the same time, he's also seen as a mainstream politician. And it'll be interesting to see which way those numbers evolve.
Dritan, per usual, I appreciate all of the numbers. Thanks for coming on and breaking them down for us.
Thank you very much.